The death certificate in my hands says I died 3 years before I was born. My mother's voice slithers through the house, calling me closer. But the Polaroids in my lap prove I'm not her daughter. The doorknob rattles. I shove the evidence into my bag and run, but Dr. Sterling's car blocks the driveway. His smile twists as he steps out. My librarian's bag swings heavy in my grip, the only weapon I have. One wrong move, and I disappear like the real Sarah Miller did. The woods swallow me whole, but he's still coming. Dust motes danced in the shafts of gray light piercing the attic gables. Sarah pried the rusted latch of the leather trunk, the scent of cedar and stale ozone stinging her nostrils. Beneath a pile of moth-eaten wool sweaters, her fingers brushed a yellowed envelope. She slid the contents out. The heavy parchment bore a jagged state seal, a death certificate from 1982. The name etched in fading ink was her own. Her breath hitched. Beneath the document lay a stack of Polaroids, their edges curled and white borders yellowed with age. In the top photo, a girl with Sarah's exact almond eyes and jagged front tooth grinned from a porch swing. The date stamped on the bottom read, August 1984. Sarah's pulse hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She was born in 1988. The math refused to settle, swirling into a nauseating blur of impossible dates and familiar smiles. The attic floorboards groaned under her weight as she shifted, her knees digging into the rough wood. She looked at the photo again. The child in the picture was wearing a red ribbon, identical to the one Sarah kept in her jewelry box downstairs, a family heirloom Jennifer had given her on her 16th birthday. But the girl in the photo was 4 years old in 1984. If the death certificate was real, Sarah Miller had died 6 years before Sarah herself was supposedly born. The air in the attic grew thin, smelling of ancient paper and the cold, metallic tang of a secret unearthed. Her skin prickled with a sudden, icy sweat. Every memory she held, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the birthday candles, felt like a layer of paint peeling off a rotted wall. She scrambled toward the stairs, the wooden floorboards groaning under her frantic weight. The screen door slammed behind her, echoing across the gravel driveway. She reached for her car door, but a shadow blocked the sun. Dr. Robert Sterling stood there, his white lab coat stark against the driveway's oil-stained concrete. He smelled of antiseptic and peppermint. He didn't move, his tall frame casting a long, jagged silhouette over the hood of her sedan. "Sarah, wait," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the humid afternoon air. "Get away from me, Robert." Her voice cracked, the sound thin and desperate. She fumbled with her keys, the metal biting into her palm, but her hands were shaking too hard to find the lock. He lunged, his fingers clamping around her wrist like a steel vise. He twisted her arm behind her spine, forcing her chest against the hot metal of the sedan. The sun-baked paint scorched through her thin blouse, and the smell of hot wax and asphalt filled her lungs. "You aren't going anywhere until we talk," he hissed into her ear. Sarah thrashed, the grit of the driveway biting into her palms as she clawed for an escape. She felt the weight of her heavy leather librarian's bag hanging from her shoulder. With a guttural cry, she swung the bag with every ounce of terror-fueled strength. The heavy corner of the bag, packed with hardback reference books, caught Sterling squarely across the bridge of his nose. The sound was a sickening crack, like a dry branch snapping in winter. Sterling's grip vanished as he stumbled back, his hands flying to his face. His expensive, wire-rimmed glasses shattered, one lens falling to the gravel with a musical tink. Blood bloomed between his fingers, dark and thick. Sarah didn't look back. She dove into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life with a mechanical scream that drowned out Sterling's muffled shout of pain. She threw the car into reverse, tires spitting gravel against the garage door, and tore down the suburban street, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The drive to the county records office was a blur of gray asphalt and green lawns that looked suddenly hostile. Every house she passed felt like a watching eye. She pulled into the parking lot of the municipal building, the tires screeching as she braked. The air inside the records office was sterile, heavy with the smell of ozone from the massive, outdated photocopiers. It coated the back of her throat, making it hard to swallow. Mark Henderson was waiting behind the counter, his hair disheveled and his shirt tucked in unevenly. He looked up, his eyes widening as he saw Sarah's disheveled state. "Sarah, you look like you've seen a ghost, you know." Mark leaned over the counter, his voice a frantic whisper. "I'm sorry. Did something happen, right? Mark, I need you to run a number." Sarah's voice was a jagged rasp. She slid a scrap of paper across the counter, her fingers clicking her ballpoint pen in a frantic pattern of 3. Click, click, click. "My social security number. Check the original filing, please." Mark hesitated, his eyes darting to the security camera near the ceiling. He bit his lip, then turned to the terminal. The rhythmic tap, tap, tap of the keys was the only sound in the oppressive silence. The screen flickered, casting a pale, ghostly light over his face. He grew pale, his posture sagging as if the data on the screen carried physical weight. "Sarah, this number," Mark whispered, his voice trembling. "It's flagged. It belongs to a Sarah Miller, born in 1980. But the file says the benefits were terminated in 1982. Because the holder is deceased. The original Sarah Miller died 30 years ago, you know? I'm sorry, but you're using the identity of a dead infant, right?" The words hit Sarah like a physical blow to the stomach. She gripped the edge of the laminate counter, the cold surface feeling like ice against her numb fingers. Her entire legal existence, her driver's license, her bank account, her library employment, was a ghost story. She was a shadow living in a dead girl's shoes. "There's more," Mark said, his voice dropping even lower. He leaned in so close she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "I dug into the cold case files while I was waiting for you. The original Sarah Miller, she didn't just die. She was the victim in a high-profile murder case back in '82. A toddler snatched from a park and found 3 days later. The case was never solved. It tore the town apart, you know." Sarah felt the room tilt. The white fluorescent lights above hummed with a low, electric vibration that made her teeth ache. She wasn't just a replacement. She was a living mask for a tragedy. "I have to go," Sarah gasped, her mind racing through the data sets of her life, searching for the missing variable. "Mark, thank you." "Wait, Sarah, the police, they're looking for you, right?" Mark reached out, but she was already backing away. "Your mom, Jennifer, she called the precinct. She said you had a violent break. She said you were dangerous, you know? I'm sorry, I should have told you first, right?" Sarah bolted. She burst through the heavy glass doors into the humid afternoon air. She needed money. She needed to disappear before the net closed. She pulled into a drive-through ATM at the First National Bank, her breath coming in shallow hitches. She shoved her card into the machine, the plastic clicking against the metal teeth of the reader. "Enter PIN, 4812. Her fingers moved with mechanical precision. The screen didn't show her balance. Instead, a red box flashed. "Transaction denied. Contact issuing bank." No. Sarah hissed, hitting the cancel button. The machine groaned, a deep mechanical whirring that sounded like a growl. A new message appeared. Card retained for security purposes. The machine swallowed her card with a final, definitive clack. A silent alarm, she realized, with a jolt of ice in her veins, had likely already been triggered. The bank was a trap. Jennifer had cut off her oxygen. She abandoned the car 2 blocks away, ducking into the cramped, humid bathroom of a nearby gas station. The smell of bleach and old cigarettes was suffocating. She leaned against the graffitied wall, her hands trembling as she unzipped her favorite tan trench coat. She felt something hard in the lining near the collar, a small rectangular lump that shouldn't be there. With a pocket knife from her bag, she sliced through the fabric. A small black disc tumbled out into her palm. A tracking device. It pulsed with a tiny, rhythmic red light, a mechanical heartbeat. Jennifer hadn't just been a mother. She had been a warden. Sarah had been broadcasted to Jennifer's phone for months, maybe years. Every trip to the library, every grocery run, every secret meeting. Jennifer had been watching the dot on the screen. She threw the tracker into a trash can full of wet paper towels and bolted out the back door into the alleyway. The sound of a heavy engine revving made her freeze. A massive tow truck, its yellow lights flashing like predatory eyes, turned the corner. The driver, a man with grease-stained hands and a permanent scent of menthol cigarettes, leaned out the window. Richard Baker. Sarah recognized him. He was the man Sterling used for logistics. "Nowhere to run, Sarah," Baker growled, the truck lurching forward. The alley was narrow, a canyon of brick and overflowing dumpsters. Sarah lunged for a rusted chain-link fence at the far end. The metal was cold and jagged, biting into her palms as she scrambled up. She felt a sharp tug. Her shoe caught in the mesh. She kicked it free, leaving the loafer behind, and tumbled over the top. She hit the pavement on the other side with a jarring thud that sent a spike of pain up her ankles. Her hands were raw, weeping blood where the rust had sliced her skin. She heard the truck's tires screech as Baker slammed on the brakes, unable to follow through the narrow gap. She didn't wait. She ran in her stocking feet, the cold pavement stinging her soles, and disappeared into the shadows of a passing city bus. Pulling herself onto the rear steps just as the doors hissed shut, she met Mark 3 hours later at a secluded safe house, a half-finished basement in a suburb 2 towns over. The air smelled of damp concrete and sawdust. Mark was pacing, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I found it, Sarah. I used my old clearance codes to look at the personnel files from the '82 case, you know? I'm sorry, it's bad, right?" He laid a grainy, photocopied document on a wooden crate. It was an old department roster. At the top of the list, under lead detective, was a name that made Sarah's heart stop. Jennifer Miller. She wasn't just the mother who lost a child, Sarah whispered, the realization washing over her like a freezing tide. She was the cop in charge of finding the killer. "Exactly," Mark said, his voice cracking. "She didn't find the girl because the girl was dead. And then, a few years later, a foundling appears in a neighboring county, and Jennifer rescues her. She used her badge to bury the evidence of your real parents and write a new story with you as the lead, you know? I'm sorry, she stole you, right?" Sarah stood up, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the dark corners of the basement. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a cold, hard anger was beginning to crystallize. "She thinks she can erase me because she owns the paperwork. But paperwork can be found. I'm going into the archives, Mark. I'm going to find the Jane Doe file from 1991. The day I was found." The plan was a desperate gamble. They arrived at the precinct under the cover of a mounting thunderstorm. Mark created a diversion at the front desk, feigning a panic attack and demanding to see a supervisor, drawing the night shift's attention. Sarah slipped through the side service entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The basement records room was a labyrinth of towering metal shelves and cardboard boxes. The temperature was a constant, bone-chilling 55 degrees. Sarah's fingers went numb as she flipped through the brittle pages of the 1991 ledger. The smell of old dust and rot was overwhelming. She found it. Box 412. Jane Doe. Case number 91-047. Inside was a Polaroid of a 6-year-old girl with wide, observant eyes, sitting in the back of a police cruiser. She was wearing a tattered blue dress and holding a plastic dinosaur. Sarah touched the photo. It was her. The report stated she had been found wandering alone at a diner in Ohio, unable to tell the officers her name or where she came from. A floorboard creaked above her. Then, the heavy thud of footsteps on the metal stairs. You always were too curious for your own good, Sarah. Jennifer stood at the end of the aisle. She wasn't wearing her floral apron or carrying a plate of cookies. She wore a dark tactical jacket, and her face was a mask of cold, clinical authority. She held a heavy industrial flashlight in one hand, the beam cutting through the darkness like a blade. Mom, why? Sarah's voice was a whisper. I saved you. Jennifer snapped, the flashlight beam dancing wildly as she stepped closer. You were a stray, a nothing. I gave you a name. I gave you a life. I fixed the mistake the world made when it took my Sarah away. You didn't fix anything, Sarah said, clutching the file to her chest. You committed a kidnapping. You stole me from people who probably spent their whole lives looking for me. Jennifer's face twisted. She lunged, the heavy flashlight swinging in a brutal arc. It caught Sarah across the temple with a sickening thud. The world exploded into white light, then faded into a jagged, pulsing gray. Sarah collapsed against the metal shelves, the cold floor rushing up to meet her. The file slipped from her fingers as the darkness swallowed her whole. When Sarah opened her eyes, the world was a blur of sterile white and the rhythmic pop fizz of a flickering fluorescent light. Her head throbbed with a rhythmic, stabbing pain. She tried to move her hands, but they were bound to the rails of a narrow cot. Cold metal bit into her wrists. She's awake, a voice said. Dr. Sterling. He was standing over her, a fresh bandage across his nose, his eyes cold behind a new pair of glasses. Jennifer was there too, sitting in a plastic chair by the door. She looked calm, almost bored. She held a stack of papers in her lap. The Jane Doe file is gone, Sarah, Jennifer said softly. And I'm afraid your friend Mark is currently being processed for kidnapping and interstate flight. It's a tragedy, really. Your mental break was much more severe than we anticipated. You can't do this, Sarah rasped, her throat feeling like it was filled with glass. I already have, Jennifer said. She held up a document. This is a power of attorney you signed on your 18th birthday. And this is an involuntary commitment order signed by Dr. Sterling and a local magistrate. You are a danger to yourself and others, Sarah. You'll be staying here at Blackwood for a very long time. Sarah looked at the door. 2 police officers stood there, their faces impassive. They weren't looking at a victim, they were looking at a patient. The entire department was a wall of silence, protecting one of their own to avoid the scandal of a 30-year-old crime. Take her to the high-security ward, Sterling commanded. Sarah felt the sharp prick of a needle in her arm. The world began to tilt, the white walls stretching into long, distorted shadows. She was being erased again. pulled back into the fog Jennifer had created. As she was wheeled down the narrow, windowless hallway, the last thing she heard was the muffled sound of Jennifer humming "Happy Birthday" under her breath. The cell at Blackwood Sanitarium was a concrete box. No windows, no mirrors. Just the hum of the ventilation and the weight of the silence. Sarah sat on the edge of the thin mattress, her fingers clicking in patterns of 3 against her thigh. Click, click, click. She had lost the file. She had lost Mark. But she hadn't lost her mind. She reached into the waistband of her leggings. Mark had been smarter than she'd realized. During their last meeting, he had pressed something small and flat into her hand. A burner phone, thin enough to hide. She had tucked it away before the struggle in the archives. The door groaned open. Jennifer walked in, carrying a tray of food. She looked triumphant. "I burned the files, Sarah," Jennifer whispered, leaning over her. "The Ohio report, the photos, the death certificate. Everything. There is no record left of that little girl in the diner. There is only the Sarah Miller I created." "And my parents?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. "The people I came from?" Jennifer smiled, a thin, cruel line. "They were just travelers. A car wreck on a rainy night in '91. I was first on the scene. They were already gone. You were in the back seat, crying for a mother who couldn't hear you. So I heard you instead. I made sure the accident report lost the mention of a child. It was so easy, Sarah. The world is so messy, and people are so happy to let a police officer clean it up." Sarah felt the phone in her waistband, the record button already active. She let Jennifer talk. She let her gloat about the mercy of the kidnapping, the brilliance of the cover-up. Every word was a nail in the coffin Jennifer was building for herself. The commitment hearing was held 3 days later in a small, wood-paneled room within the sanitarium. Judge Thomas Wright sat at the head of the table, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in a permanent scowl. He counted the pens on the table, exactly 4, before looking up. "The petition is for permanent institutionalization," Sterling began, his voice smooth and clinical. "The patient exhibits paranoid delusions regarding her identity and has shown violent tendencies toward her caregivers." Jennifer sat next to him, looking like the grieving, exhausted mother. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Sarah stood up. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She looked at the judge with the calm, methodical eyes of a librarian who had finally found the missing volume. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the small room, "I would like to present a record." She pulled the burner phone from her pocket and pressed play. Jennifer's voice filled the room, cold, distorted, but unmistakable. "I made sure the accident report lost the mention of a child. It was so easy, Sarah." The silence that followed was absolute. Jennifer's face went from pale to a sickly, mottled gray. Sterling froze, his hand trembling as he reached for his watch. Judge Wright leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the device on the table. "Where did you get this?" the judge asked, his gravelly voice dropping an octave. "From the woman who stole my life," Sarah said. "And I have the filing codes for the original accident report in Ohio. June 14th, 1991. Highway 74. If you look at the unredacted logs, you'll find the truth. I am not Sarah Miller, and I am not insane." The collapse was swift. The recording was the crack in the dam that Jennifer couldn't patch. Within hours, state investigators were at the door. The local department's wall of silence crumbled as officers scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Sterling was stripped of his medical license before the sun went down. and Jennifer was led out of the courthouse in the very handcuffs she had once used on others. 6 months later, Sarah stood on a pier in Seattle. The air was thick with the scent of salt and turning tides. The sound of wood creaking against the water was a peaceful rhythm, not a threat. She held a new document in her hand, a birth certificate with her real name, Maya Vance. She watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. The Sarah Miller ghost was gone, buried in a prison cell with the woman who had tried to play God. Maya took a deep breath, the cold Pacific air filling her lungs. For the first time in 28 years, the record was complete. The past was a closed book, and the future was a blank page waiting for her to write the first word. She turned away from the water, her footsteps steady on the wooden planks, and walked toward the city lights, a woman who finally belonged to herself.